here in front of the Richland County Courthouse, and we have a talk by a guest to our community, John Nichols, so stay right here. As a pundit, deep thinker, journalist, and author, John Nichols visited our community recently and gave this presentation.
Great that he's come to our small burb or village or town and is going to grace us with a lot of great information. And he's witty and entertaining and smart, and he's an author and a journalist. I love that. I put the deep thinker thing on that poster. He's got a kick out of that. So, but yeah, he's just an all-around great guy, and he's been everywhere. And I kind of think of him as the progressive Johnny Cash, because it's like he's been everywhere, man. So please join me in welcoming John Nichols.
You're going to tell me whether you can hear me, and if not, I will speak without the mic, and you will still hear me. Some of you. But I will tell you, I learned all this when I was a little kid. I grew up in a town where we aspired to be Richland Center. We thought, wow, the big city. I'm not kidding. Main Street, the whole bit, bookstore. You know, you got stuff, tanning salon, you got things we never had. But I grew up in a very, very small town. And, you know, when you're growing up in a small town and you're, you know, kind of aspiring to be Richland Center, and you're aspiring to the big city, sometimes you get to go to exciting events. Not in your town. But you get to go over to Kenosha. And that's my parents took me to Kenosha, to the United Auto Workers Local 72 Hall. In like 1972, I was a little kid, and we went to see Ted Kennedy give a speech. And it was an epic event. They had a big stage, not as many people as you have tonight. This is, you know, good crowd. But now Kennedy we probably drew a couple thousand people. It was, you know, this is 72. His brothers had been assassinated. Some people thought of him as a presidential candidate. So all these people came out. And somehow, Local 72, United Auto Workers, had forgotten to get a microphone. And Kennedy said, "No problem." And he spoke at the top of his lungs for a half hour. And I learned a lesson from that. That is, you don't worry about the microphone, right? If the microphone isn't working, you do the best you can. But if everybody can hear, even our friend in the very back there hanging at the bar, who informed me, folks in the back there informed me that if you're not good, they're going to head out the door. Because they, you know, the ones in front, it's much harder for you. But I am genuinely honored to be in Richland Center. I come from a very, as I said, a very, very small town. I was born in Union Grove, Wisconsin, population 970. I was 971. And that's sort of over in eastern Wisconsin. We were always a little embarrassed by that because all of my relatives are from over in this part of the state. My mother was born in Boscoville. She grew up in Lone Rock. But Lone Rock did not have a kindergarten. And so, every morning at about 5:30 in the morning, my grandmother would bring my mother out to where the milk train was going by. And she would put my mother on the milk train to go to Blue River. Because Blue River had a kindergarten. And so then my mother was picked up by one of her cousins, because we only had, my mom has about 1,500 cousins. Then you get into the second cousins. but my mom has a lot of cousins, and they're all out here. One of her cousins came with a little wheelbarrow, and we'd take her off to kindergarten. Then they would bring her back, and they'd catch the milk train going back at the end of the day. Can you imagine those times, right? That you would put your child, your little precious 5-year-old, on a train, and say to the guy working the milk train, yeah, dump her off in Blue River, and she survived. In fact, she survived so well. She's 93 years old, living over by Lake Geneva, and still tells the stories of growing up in southwestern Wisconsin. And I will tell you, the big deal was when you got to go to Richland Center. I mean, so I feel I finally hit the mark. Now I have to establish my credentials here because even though I've done a little of that, I want to ask, I think, first and foremost, I want to tell you that I have relatives in the room, or relatives by marriage. And Jane Adams here, right, is a relative by marriage. And next to her is a relative by relation to marriage. And in fact, it's one of your own, great.
Sister, and this is my cousin.
See, these are all relatives of mine in some weird, convoluted way. Yeah, well, then there's also my wife, who's right up here, Mary Vitari from up in Madison. And she is actually, she's from Philadelphia, and so all of this is bizarre to her. The most bizarre thing of all is, of course, that being a good Wisconsinite, and I promise it's not going to be all stories about growing up in Wisconsin, but being a good Wisconsinite, a good rural Wisconsinite, when I leave, I do not lock my door. Right? I don't lock the door of the house. Because how do you get back in? And there's all sorts of issues there that become complex. So I don't lock the door to my house. My wife thinks that's crazy, right? Because we live in the dangerous city of Madison. And so she's always like, you gotta lock the door. She literally, as we're walking out, she just pull it shut, and I cheat. I pull it a little bit, and I don't really pull it shut, because if I do, then I can't get back in. So, it's a big deal around our house. It's sort of a subject of debate. And I think my wife thinks I'm a little weird in that regard. Except when we got tonight to Richland Center. Because I said, well, we got to take a walk around Richland Center. Because this is such a cool place. Again, childhood is a big place to go to. So we went and looked at the Frank Lloyd Wright, German warehouse. You got to look at that because it's an epic international, yes. Well, you may applaud it because it is a great thing. And then I pointed out all the other architecture around town and all this stuff like that. And of course, because this is a relatively smaller city that has a great bookstore, right? You got a bookstore, they sell records, the whole bit, it's incredible. So, so we went by the bookstore. And we're looking at it, it says it's open 10 to 2 on Sunday. It's reasonable, it's kind of slightly varying the biblical requirements, but it's cool, And so 10 to 2 on Sunday, they're open. And I was like, darn, we missed the bookstore. Because it's about 4:30, 5 o'clock, something like that. And I, of course, being a good Wisconsinite, I tried the door. And it was unlocked. And I thought, well, the person who runs this place must be in here. So I go in, and I said, hello? Hello? And I saw my friend Jennifer Rubin's book for sale, and I saw a couple other friends' books for sale, and I thought, well, this is a good bookstore, but it's got a lot of good stuff. And I'm like, hello? There was no one there. The door was unlocked. And I said, this beats leaving your house unlocked by a mile, because in Richland Center, they leave the businesses unlocked. That is a cool town, let me tell you. So, and I did not take anything. And I know that now, probably because of this address, sadly, probably they'll start locking it, which is a sad thing. But I did, the one thing I picked up, and I wanted to just, if I have the manual dexterity to do this. Yeah. So I picked up this little sign here, right? Which they had there, they had a couple of them there, and it was very nice. And I thought, well, this is very cool. And I've come to expose a lie. Because it says, journalist, and I passed for a journalist, author, written a lot of books, about a dozen of them. Pundit, it's kind of embarrassing, but do MSNBC a lot, so I guess I'm a pundit. Go on there and say, you know, yeah, Biden's got a good chance of winning and stuff like that. But then it says deep thinker. And I have never been accused of that. Certainly not in my family. In fact, if anything, that is the exact opposite of how I am thought of. And so I just want to warn you that if you came here looking for a deep thinker, you may talk to my wife later, but I am just not going to deliver on that. I'm going to do the best I can to talk about a few things. And the one thing that I will talk about, and it really excites me, is to be in this community, right? To be in Richland Center, southwestern Wisconsin, with all these people, with this great crowd. And before we leave, I'm going to take a picture of you. Because I do that. I think I did that when I was over in Fenimore. I'm touring the bowling alleys and summer clubs in southwestern Wisconsin. And I was in Fenimore, I guess late last year, to speak to folks over there. And of course, I seated the audience with relatives. You know, Jane and all of these folks were there, so we got a good crowd. And I took a picture of it, all of us, all jammed together, and it looked pretty good. You know, it looked like a good crowd. And I sent that to all my friends in New York. And I said, these are all rural progressives and rural Democrats. Because people in New York and Washington desperately need to know that there are rural people and small town people and small city people out in America who are progressive Democrats, who actually believe in economic and social and racial justice, who believe in saving the environment, saving the planet, and actually believe in peace rather than war. These people are out here in America. And one of the reasons that the Democratic Party doesn't always do as well as it should is that some of the people in Washington and New York forget about that. And they desperately need to be reminded, because the way that Democrats win is by starting in rural America. Right? You don't stop in rural, you don't say, oh well, maybe we'll get some rural votes. No. What you recognize is you've got to go out to the places that are farther afield. You got to go down that country road. I was just talking to Mr. Gill. Where is? Oh, there he is, right up front. Yeah. And he was telling me he lives at the end of a country road. Nowhere. He lives in nowhere. And he doesn't lock his door. And he says, that's fine, right? I said, well, you know, out in New York, if you tell somebody that somebody lives on the end of a country road with an unlocked door, they will immediately go to a horror film, right? You know, it's like some slasher is going to find you out there. The call is coming from inside the house. And because an awful lot of people on the East Coast and the West Coast, to be very honest about this, they think of rural America as just pass that right down there. That's exactly right. These guys, this is just like in school, right? There's kids passing notes. Yeah, and these are, you got it, and whoa, what's that? Okay. Well, forget my point. Please do not use microphone. It has a bad sound with every word and is distracting.
No.
Is that right? Is it better without the microphone?
No.
Okay. I mean, trust me, I love that. Tell me how best to do this.
No.
And I will. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay.
Farther away from your face.
Farther away is better. You are going to be in charge of telling me, move the microphone down if it's not in the right place, okay? You just give me the cue.
Okay.
And I'm going to follow, because when Mr. Gill was up here, it sounded horrible. And I definitely, I want to sound better than him. It's all good. We're going to do our best. And so what I will tell you is this, that it is absolutely vital that rural America be brought back into the mix of our politics in this country. Because if there isn't a fight for rural America, then Democrats are never going to win big, right? They may win on the margins. And the Democratic Party, they can't neglect urban areas. That's their base, right? And of course they're going to fight for suburban areas, especially with the issue of reproductive freedom and that on the ballot. They're going to look there. But if you stop there and you say, well, we can get 51% out of the urban areas and some of the suburbs, and you don't go big for rural areas, then at the end of the day, you're going to win 51%, right? You're going to be maybe narrowly above the margin, but you're not going to be at a place where you can actually govern in the way that you need to govern. Because the fact of the matter is, Joe Biden, he's got new ads on TV. I don't know if you saw them. They're really good ads, right? And he says, I actually get things done. And he starts out and says, I'm a little old, and all that. But he says, I know how to get things done. And it's a good ad, good solid ad. But the fact is, Joe Biden got about half as much done as he could have if Democrats had had a substantial margin in the Senate, and if they had been able to keep the House of Representatives. Simple as that. And you know how you keep the House of Representatives? I'll give you one example. You win the 3rd District of Wisconsin. You don't leave Senator Paff running without enough money in 2022, which is exactly what the National Democrats did. They said, well, no way he's going to win out there. And you know what they said? They would say sometimes, he's not the most exciting guy. And I said, have you met people in the 3rd District? I mean, there is, like Mr. Usted, there are exciting people in the 3rd District, but there are a lot of down-home folks who don't try to be all that exciting, right? They go about their work, they do what they're supposed to do. They are teachers and farmers and small business owners, and they're serious about what they do. And the fact is, Brad Paff almost won without enough money. And so this is I'm being pretty honest with you here. This is where the problem is. When they neglect rural areas, they lose a seat. Now let me tell you this, if Brad Paff had won, right? If he had won back in 2022, do you know what the Republican margin in the House of Representatives would be right now? 1. They'd basically be down to a seat at this point, because they've lost so many and it's been kind of a ticking down. Might be 2, depending on how you measure one representative from Pennsylvania. But the bottom line is, if they had won this district, if they had won, there's a rural district, a couple of other rural districts, there's one out in Oregon that they came close to winning. There's another one down cutting up in the middle of Texas that they came close to winning. If they had won those rural seats, you would have had Speaker Hakeem Jeffries for the last 2 years, not whichever speaker this week the Republicans have chosen. And so that's why I come out to rural areas a lot. I'm very lucky. I get to be I was in New York a week or so ago. Tomorrow I go out to Washington. I get to travel around a lot and be in a lot of places. Sometimes they let me be on TV once and then they quickly, so I never do that again. Do a lot of radio, do a lot of this stuff on a national level, and that's a great thing, right? But what I keep trying to tell people is that doing all the, what? Up, down, keep it down, keep it down. That's right, you're excellent. Excellent. But what I try to tell people is that it's more important for me to be with you on a night like this than it is for me to be in New York and Washington. Because the fact of the matter is, the people in New York and Washington don't know how to do it. You people actually know how to do it. And all you ask for is a fair fight. And the fact of the matter is, you haven't had a fair fight in a long time. This state was radically gerrymandered in 2011, right? And I don't like to swear in front of relatives, but by Scott Walker. And I know, I apologize. My mother isn't here. If she was here, I wouldn't say the name. But by Scott Walker and Robin Boss. Will he ever leave? And Well, the reason we win the legislature is because we have better candidates and better ideas. Except that, like in election after election, 200,000 more people vote for Democrats. It's just that they've concentrated the Democrats in such a small number of places that the Democrats don't get control of the legislature. So they don't have better ideas, they don't have better candidates. I'm not saying a partisan thing, this is a scientific observation. They do not have better candidates. And so they win because they cheated. Because it is cheating, right? If you move the lines, if you're playing tennis, right, and you move the line on the other side up to 2 feet from the net, and then you move the line on your side out to 20 feet from the net, so that wherever the ball hits, you can play it, but the other one can't, you have cheated. And the fact of the matter is that they cheated, and they got themselves control of the legislature from 2010, 2011, right up to today. And it was literally destructive to the state of Wisconsin.
Yes.
Yes, it was. And what did they do? What did they do with that destructive capacity?
Destroy public schools.
Well, there you go. Would you like to come up here? No, because you're exactly right. Just public schools, public services, right? That baseline, what they did back in 2011 when they attacked our unions, when they cut billions of dollars out of public schools and public services, when they told us we couldn't have a train, right? I'm going to Spain in May, right? I'm going to go to Barcelona. I have a friend who lives down in Valencia. And he said, you got to come down to Valencia to see us down there. I said, oh, that's great. He says, you can take the train that Scott Walker turned down. Not kidding. It was a Spanish train company called Talgo. And the trains that they build run in Spain. They are high-speed trains that take you from Barcelona to Valencia in like minutes, like about hours. But it's like incredibly fast, incredibly clean, incredibly smooth, and totally environmentally sound. We could have had that train. Scott Walker said, I don't want it. I don't want that. Yeah, she's going, that would be so cool. And you could go to Minneapolis, right, or La Crosse. And so they took our train, which, you know, as a kid, I like trains, and so I think that's bad. Then Scott Walker, people forget, he also turned down wireless internet. He said, well, we can't have it because of federal money for wireless internet. Boy, if we take that, we'll end up spending more money on internet. Well, with all due respect to Scott Walker, the internet's kind of a big thing now. And when he turned down wireless internet, he screwed over rural Wisconsin. That's a French term, screwed over. But he left rural Wisconsin in the lurch because that's where you needed the wireless internet. You need the high-speed wireless internet in small towns. Small towns, rural areas didn't get it. And so they took our train, they took our internet, they screwed over our schools, they messed up our public services, and then worst of all, I mean, you're like, wow, how could it get worse than that? They at one point in their budget tried to write out the Wisconsin idea for the University of Wisconsin system. And what is the Wisconsin idea? It is that our public institutions serve the people of Wisconsin. And so their whole concept was, let's take everything that is about Wisconsin away, right? People will forget how great this place is, how special it is, how much better it is than every place else in America, because this is the coolest state. There is simply no question of that. But we're going to diminish it so that people think, well, I'm kind of living in North Alabama. And so as a result, I got nothing to live for, I might as well vote Republican. And they actually did this. This was a concerted plan. I know this for two reasons. One, I know Scott Walker quite well. He actually, in fact, he was kind of a nice guy once upon a time. And then he met the Koch brothers and everything degenerated from there. But the other thing is that Scott Walker acknowledged this. When he went down, he was going to, remember Scott Walker ran for president?
Yep.
If you blinked, you missed it. But there was a brief period when he ran for president. And actually, the one thing about it is that you may think that Ron DeSantis ran the worst presidential campaign in the history of America. his campaign when he was literally tied with asterisk. No, at the bottom of the poll, after 1% of asterisk, that was where he was in his poll. So, I mean, it didn't go well in that presidential campaign, right? There was a little bit of a glitch there for Scott Walker's bid for the presidency. But this is where I was on to the guy. Because he went down to Arizona to give a speech at the Goldwater Institute. Now, right off the bat, I mean, Barry Goldwater actually turned out to be a good guy, but in 1964, he was nothing great to get excited about. He was so bad that Richland County voted against him. And so, Barry goes down to the Goldwater Institute, and he says, you know what I did up in Wisconsin? Everybody said, what did you do? And he didn't say gerrymandering. He didn't say cut the schools, cut the public services. He didn't say get rid of the Wisconsin idea. He said, when I was sworn in as governor of Wisconsin, it was in the state capitol, in the rotunda area, in the middle of the state capitol. There's over, on one side of the state capitol, over by the governor's office, there's a bust of Robert M. La Follette. He says, Robert M. La Follette was this radical, this terrible left-winger, bad guy in all sorts of ways. And every governor since La Follette, since they put that bust in there, every governor has been sworn in next to the bust of La Follette, right? La Follette looking over their shoulder saying, and he said, so I moved my swearing in to the other side of the rotunda so I wouldn't be anywhere near Robert M. La Follette. And I will tell you this, my great-grandfather from Blue River helped to manage La Follette's campaigns in western Wisconsin. He was a Grant County board member and the village president of Blue River for 37 years. He was such a La Follette man that they renamed the street, main street in Blue River, La Follette, right? They were not imaginative, but they were clear on where they stood. And with all due respect, if Scott Walker doesn't want to be near a bust of Robert M. La Follette, I don't want to be near Scott Walker. So that's what they did, right? This was how they assaulted this state. And you need to understand that because they came from illicit power. It came from out-of-state money. It came from cheating on the maps. It came from drawing up a whole politics that was designed to make sure that people with unpopular ideas could have power, right? You could come to power even though it wasn't what the people wanted. And they got away with it for a while. And then in 2018, everybody's like, this is really not working well. And so they elected, you know, I think it's safe to say the most boring man in America, Tony Evers, as governor of Wisconsin. And they said, we would like a kind of boring school teacher, school administrator, sincere, decent guy who actually worked in a cheese factory to be the governor of Wisconsin. And Scott Walker was out, Tony Evers was in. That's a transformational moment right there because all their lines about how, oh, Wisconsin doesn't really like Democrats, right? Oh, well, you know, we elected, but we didn't just do that. We elected Josh Call, Peg Slaughter's son, as the Attorney General of Wisconsin. And then we elected Sarah Godlewski as the state treasurer of Wisconsin. And we even re-elected Doug La Follette, who we always re-elected until he finally got bored, as Secretary of State. The Democrats swept everything. Even this woman from the east side of Madison, Tammy Baldwin, got re-elected to the United States Senate. Sweeping through all these offices, right? And still, they had that illicit power in the legislature. They were able to deny the will of the people. What did they do? They came back into special session, and they took power away from the governor and the attorney general, and Scott Walker signed it, right? He said, I like using these powers, but I'm not going to let my successors use these powers. Do you understand how many of you were teachers? The entire room. Okay. So the bottom line is, if you had a student somebody else who's got the ball, and so I'm going to change the rules so that they can't win. They can't do what they want to do. As a teacher, you would schedule a parent-teacher conference. And unfortunately, they got away with it. They disempowered Tony Evers. Just like Joe Biden at the federal level wasn't able to do all that he wanted to do, Tony Evers has been able to do all that he wants to do because they cheat. It's just as simple as that. And then, a funny thing happened in 2023. That woman who came out and visited you, Janet Protasiewicz, she got elected to the state Supreme Court of Wisconsin by carrying not just urban areas, but rural areas across the state. She swept to the seat on the Supreme Court with a landslide majority of people who knew exactly why they were electing her. They were electing her to clean up the mess in Wisconsin and to give us fair maps and fair elections. And there aren't many politicians that actually keep their promise, right? But what did we get out of the Supreme Court? Fair maps and fair elections. They just threatened to do it, right? They threatened to do fair maps. And Robin Boss and Republicans got so scared, they said, okay, we'll take Tony Evers' maps. Because they know Tony Evers, he's like the nicest guy you ever met. And they knew that his maps were actually more gentle than the Supreme Court's maps would be. That's the reality of it. The Supreme Court had done it, they would have actually drawn super fair maps, which would have been even better for the Democrats. So the Republicans suddenly are like, oh, we like Tony Evers a lot. We took away his power to govern, but we are definitely going to take his maps. The fact is, Evers' maps don't give Democrats everything they wanted. What Evers' maps do give Democrats is the ability to work hard and win seats in the state legislature. If you work hard in places like this, instead of banging your head against the wall and trying, but not getting anywhere, now you can start to win. It makes working hard valuable. And, you know, Vernon County, which I realize we're in Richland County, and obviously, are there any Vernon County folks here? It's enough so I won't insult you. But you know, I mean, I think it's pretty fair to say people in Richland County kind of look at Vernon County and go, if only. But Vernon County is actually kind of a Democratic county.
It is.
There you go. It's got Baroqua, which has a bike shop, and you know, and a co-op, and all sorts of other cool stuff, right? You know, it's like Baroqua. Bookstore too. And you feel like when you're in Baroqua, you feel like you've like gone down a side road on the east side of Madison. You're like, whoa, this is a very cool town.
All the other youth initiatives, though.
You got everything in Baroqua. Baroqua is, I mean, basically it's New York, Baroqua. And so it's like, Baroqua's this great place, right? It's got like a cool radio station. I went out there and gave a speech one time, and it was like amazing. There were all these like incredible people. They had kids from the high school all prepare little presentations before I spoke. And you know, it only took like 3 hours. And so Baroque was like this great place, right? But it's also like this really democratic place. And my friend Alicia Lineberg, you know, I hope everybody likes her. She ran for the legislature a couple times, worked really, really hard. You know, banged her head against the wall. Didn't work, right? Other people, there's this very young woman, I think she was 18, she ran for the legislature, banged her head against the wall, didn't work. It kept trying, right? Because Baroqua and Vernon County was drawn in with a whole bunch of Republican areas that you just couldn't be competitive. Well, you know what they did with the fair map? The fair map is Vernon County, and then it kind of cuts up just above it into a little bit of southern La Crosse County, and lo and behold, you have a district that a Democrat can actually win. And last week, Tara Johnson, the chairman of the La Crosse County Board, and one of the most able Democrats in the state of Wisconsin, somebody they actually thought about running for Congress, Tara Johnson just announced for that Vernon County, La Crosse County district, and there is a darn good chance that she is going to the state capitol from southwest Wisconsin. And I haven't figured out these new maps all that well, but I'm not even sure that Howard Markline represents you anymore. It's complicated, right? suddenly, what you're looking at is competitive districts and competitive races that are not going to be given to Democrats as a gift, but are going to be given to Democrats as an opportunity. And if you work hard, if you take it seriously, if you keep that headquarters open year-round, which, by the way, how cool is that, right? Richland Center's got its own, the Democrats actually own the headquarters. Nobody's going to kick you out. And I don't mind if Republicans own their headquarters too, but by and large, because of property and wealth and things like that, Republicans can always find somebody to give them a headquarters. Democrats, a little bit tougher. You got to get a bunch of working class people to put their money together, and that's what you did. And the fact of the matter is, now it all becomes possible. And so let me circle around. We've talked probably much more than we need to. I've revealed in that fact that I'm not a deep thinker. And so let me tell you what's going to happen in 2024. And then we're going to take some questions from you folks, which will be the good part of the program. What's going to happen in 2024 is this. Joe Biden is going to be the Democratic nominee for President of the United States. And Donald Trump is going to be the Republican nominee for President of the United States. And everybody's going to go, wow, we've never experienced this before. And it's going to be a repeat, right? And it's going to be, kind of awful. I mean, I got to be honest with you. It's going to be ugly and negative and difficult. I mean, if you think American politics is exactly what American politics should be, and exactly what democracy should be, then you are a very troubled person. The American politics is a mess, and it's awash in big money. It's too much influenced by special interest groups. Billionaires have a lot more say than working class people. I mean, it is the embodiment of what Robert M. Follett ran against 100 years ago, right? There's a lot that's wrong with our politics. We have to accept that. That is the reality. But it still is democracy, right? There still is that chance to go out and win something. And I don't know how many of you watched the State of the Union address the other night. Not a bad piece of television, was it? Right? And so you understand what our Republican friends had done running into the State of the Union address. They had literally said, well, they're probably going to have to wheel Biden in on a stretcher. And, he's so old. And as we all know, old people can't do anything. And so it was like this, they had such a negative image of him. They literally had created this impression that Joe Biden was incompetent, that he was inept, that he couldn't hear, he couldn't think, he couldn't do anything. Right? And you know what? They had banged on it for so long that a lot of people were starting to believe it. Not Republicans, right? But I'm talking about pundits and politicians and Democrats were even like, well, I don't know, he's very old. My mother's 93. I'd make her president any day of the street. And she would she'd be very gracious. But the bottom line is this. They did a number on Biden. And thank heavens they did. Right? Yeah. They did him the best favor you could ever do. Because America tuned in. Not everybody, but enough people tuned in, enough people saw the videos of it. America tuned in to see just how bad it was for Biden. It's like going to visit your great aunt. I remember I used to go visit Aunt Nola Harrison out at Greenway Manor in Spring Green. And, and it was like, how's Aunt Nola Harrison doing? She literally retired. She was Franklin Wright's secretary, right? She retired, like, in, 1920. This is like the 1980s. We're going to visit Aunt Nola Harrison. And how's it going? Oh, it's got to be bad. It's got to be rough, right? And then we get there out at Greenway Manor, and there's Aunt Nola standing out in front going, hey, I'm glad you're here, right? And she's a totally, so you want to hear another story about Franklin Wright? They burned down the place. It was terrible. But the bottom line is that she was fine, and so was Joe Biden, right? Yeah. Instead of going out there and seeing something that wasn't working, what you saw is a guy who's like faster on his feet than most of the Republicans in the room. Now, admittedly, he started with a few more IQ points. But the bottom line is how to speak to the young, in a loud voice, and always welcome at any library, especially during Pride Month. And but Gary Van Orden, he took a break from yelling at the Senate pages, and he's there and he's yelling. He goes, Biden says something that was just totally legitimate and totally true, and Derek Van Orden goes, liar. And it's like, and everybody's like, what? Even the Republicans are like, what do you mean? And he's a yelling liar there and stuff like that. And it was this weird kind of Derek Van Orden thing. But the bottom line is, here's Joe Biden going, he didn't even respond to Derek Van Orden, because that's not really necessary. But, he did respond to many of these Republicans are yelling at him, and it's bad. He would say something like, yeah, and the Republicans, they want to do a $2 billion tax cut for the rich, which, by the way, I know that Beverly Pestel, right? Is that right? Am I close? Right back there. She is working with patriotic millionaires on a local equity project here in Richland Center. They're going to put up Burma shade signs, those signs along the road one after another, that are going to read, in order to make America great, tax, or no. What's it? Tell me the slogan again.
In order to make America healthy, raise the tax rate on the ultra-wealthy.
There you go. So Biden's up there and he says, Republicans, they want to cut taxes for billionaires, the rich, by $2 trillion. I'm not good at math, that's why I went into journalism. But they want to cut by $2 trillion the taxes for the billionaire class. And the Republicans all go, no, that's liar, stuff like that. And Biden said, cool, you don't want to do that? Excellent, let's mark that down. You are opposed to cutting taxes for the rich, so am I. So that issue is off the table. Let's start talking about the next one. And issue after issue, he would say what they want to do, and then they would go, no. And he would say, cool, let me check another one off the list here. And you actually saw, and Biden admits he's old, right? He acknowledges that, but you saw, like kind of Uber grandfather, right? The guy who actually can do the job, and who is quicker than the people who are yelling at him. You think about this, you're doing a State of the Union address. That is almost like speaking on Sunday night to the Richland County Democrats, right? That is a very high-stress, pressure moment, right? The whole country is watching you, or in this case, the whole of, the banquet hall. And other people are watching you, and there's all this talk about you're too old to do this, and there's all this pressure on you, and here's Joe Biden nailing it, one after another. Do you know there was a focus group of people that was brought together to watch, these are undecided voters, they're brought together to watch Joe Biden give his State of the Union address. At the start, they had, a certain level of impression of Biden. Is he competent enough? Is he up for doing another term as president? Right? Can he do it in his 80s? And at the start of it, it was a relatively lower number. They were like, oh yeah, I've heard some pretty bad stuff about him. Sometimes he stumbles when he says stuff. And, and so this kind of negative. The number went up. There was a 17% rise, like from the start of the speech to the end. That never, ever happens in politics. You never move the needle by, almost 20% in your favor by any speech. You can be Abraham Lincoln doing the Gettysburg Address. If you move the needle by 20 points, you are doing incredible. Biden did that. And so they did him a great favor. And so what I'm going to suggest to you is this. There's a pretty darn good chance that Joe Biden gets reelected as President of the United States. All right. Yeah. That's not going to happen easy. You've got to work at that. There's a pretty good chance that Tammy Baldwin gets reelected to the United States Senate because she started her campaign to reach the Senate. There's a pretty good chance that Derek Van Orden will be yelling liar outside the Perdishing Library rather than in Congress. I know this is a partisan event. I wouldn't care if they sent progressive Republicans to the legislature. My politics is rooted in economic and social and racial justice, saving the planet, ending wars, having some sort of humanity out there. Right? That's my politics. I don't care if it's Democrat or Republican. I'll take Republicans, that's fine. Because it used to be that this area sent Republicans to the legislature, and they were to the left of the Democrats, right? Sometimes they were to the left of the socialists. And so it's not about partisanship per se. It's about where you're at, what you believe, what you're going to try and do for people, how you're going to try and make a better society. It just happens that you folks have the concession currently on trying to do a little bit more decent stuff. But here's what happens if a group of rural progressives come to the state legislature. Suddenly, the whole politics of Wisconsin begins to change. And it changes in the same way it did more than 100 years ago, when Robert M. LaFollette, from Primrose Township in Dane County, a nowhere place, Robert M. LaFollette, son of a single mom, people forget that about him, right? He's the son of a single mom. His dad died when he was 10 years old. He didn't have a lot of money. His mom had to work. He was raised, when he was a little kid, he would sit on the bench in front of the store in the town of Primrose, like the crossroads town. And the other people that would sit on the bench with him were Civil War veterans. LaFollette, born in 1855. People sitting next to him were Civil War veterans. And they would talk about this glorious struggle. And I'm sorry to my friends who don't like critical race theory. They would say, we went to fight against slavery. We went to fight against injustice. The Civil War was a righteous war for humanity, not some battle between the states. They taught him, yeah, it's okay to applaud that. I was walking around Richland Center and I saw Union Street, and I know that street isn't for a labor union, that's for the Union Army that fought on the right side of the Civil War. So LaFollette grew up with these folks, right? And they taught him about righteous struggle. And when he grew up, when he got to be 18 years old, he hooked up the buckboard wagon and he rode into Madison. It was a good distance there, horse-drawn buckboard wagon, 1873. And he goes to hear a speech being given by the incoming Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court, a guy named Edward Ryan. Ryan gets up there and he says to these students at the university, he says, you know, there's looming up this power in this country. It's going to be fully realized in your time, not mine. I'm an old man. But there's this power rising in this country. Corporations are on the move, seeking power. Not just economic power, but political power. And if we let them take that power, they will rule not just our economy, they will rule our lives. And Ryan said, which shall rule? Wealth or man? I always add women too. He said, who shall hold stations of public trust? Free and honorable men and women, or the feudal serfs of corporate capital? That wasn't Ralph Nader. That wasn't Bernie Sanders. That was Edward Ryan more than 150 years ago, speaking on the University of Wisconsin campus. And Robert M. LaFollette was there, and he said, I'm signing up. I'm signing up for this struggle. And LaFollette went to Congress. He was a very successful young congressman. And then you know what he did that got him in trouble? He stood up for immigrants. He said, immigrants should be able to speak their own language in their schools and their churches. And you know what these immigrants were? Scary, very scary thing. They had come across the border, in this case, via ship, from Germany. They were German Americans, and he defended German Americans. That got him bumped out of Congress, right? So LaFollette ended up marginalized politically, 1892. And he tried again and again to get himself elected to public office. He said, this is bad, I want to try and reframe my career, so I'm going to run for governor of Wisconsin. And he ran one time for governor of Wisconsin, and he failed. And he ran a second time for governor of Wisconsin, and he failed, because all the machine bosses, all the money, all the power, said we can't let this LaFollette guy get elected governor, because he actually talks about, you know, taking on corporations. He talks about taking on the rich. He talks about actually making Wisconsin a just and equitable state. Can't let him do it. And so Lapalli had been beaten twice. He's been beaten for Congress, beaten for everything else. He's kind of almost done politically. He's a failure. He says, I got one last shot. So he goes out to Mineral Point. Gets up on a buckboard wagon and gives a speech about the looming power of corporations, about the looming power of the rich, about the need to equalize our politics so that working class people, farmers, small town folks, that they have the power to govern their own lives, not to have it put down on them from somebody powerful and wealthy in Chicago or Washington or New York. And when he gave that speech, people were electrified. He thought, you know what? I'm going to go give that speech in Fenimore. And he did. And he gave it in Sauk City. And then he came over to Richland Center. And you know how Lapalli would give a speech? He didn't give a speech with a microphone. Right? Yeah. He'd come to a corner in a town, and he would literally start speaking on the street. People would say, that guy's crazy. Oh, probably Lapalli. And when he'd start speaking on the street and draw a crowd around him, or they'd have him in a little hall or something like that. He never had a microphone. He would just yell at the top of his lungs that I want to have justice in this state, that I want to believe that the will of the people shall be the law of the land. That was his great line. And amazingly enough, he won the Republican nomination that year, 1900. And then he won the governorship. And he won it, not starting in Milwaukee or Madison or Racine or Janesville. He won it starting in the small towns of Wisconsin. He won it starting in rural Wisconsin. And so when you send a bunch of rural legislators, rural progressives to our state legislature, I think that's where everything starts to change. It starts to change for small towns. It starts to change for farm country. It starts to get your rural schools the funding that they need. Keeps your post offices open. It keeps things functioning in small towns and rural Wisconsin. And this is the deal. As William Jennings Bryan said, says, you tear up the farms, you tear up the small towns, they'll never come back. Tear up a big city, they'll rebuild it. But you tear up rural America, and you wreck the base of this country. Well, the fact of the matter is, I have a feeling that what's going to happen this year is there's going to be a wave comes across America. And a wave has to start somewhere. Usually it starts way out in the middle of the ocean. But I kind of think this year, the wave is going to start somewhere around Union or Jefferson Street in Richland Center, Wisconsin. And it's going to sweep out across Richland Center and kind of head out toward Gotham. Or do you say Gotham? No. I know you do, but I'm saying that people from out here will not understand that. And so you can get out to Gotham and maybe down to Muscadet and Boscoville and over to Blue River and over to Lone Rock, and it's going to keep spreading over to Spring Green and Mineral Point and Dodgeville, and it's going to keep spreading all the way down, amazingly enough, even to Platteville, and it's going to keep spreading across the state out of southwestern Wisconsin, heading up to the middle of the state, going up out of Madison and heading north, heading east. And this state isn't going to be won by a little bit. This state is going to be won by a lot. And if this state is won by a lot, here's what's going to happen. We are all going to forget that Scott Walker was ever governor of Wisconsin. We are going to restore the public schools. We are going to restore the public services. We are going to restore the strength of the University of Wisconsin. We're going to stop picking on people and start treating them as human beings. We're going to make our farms strong. We're going to make our small towns strong. We're going to make our cities strong. We're going to stop picking on Milwaukee and respect it as a great center, a great city in this country. We're going to stop picking on women and tell them they don't have a right to choose. We're going to stop, yes, you can applaud that. We're going to stop picking on immigrants and tell them, yeah, you know what? You come here and you revitalize our small towns. You make our places stronger. You open up those small businesses. Yeah, harmless, you make it a better place. And we're going to say, as rural people historically have, that you know what? If you're my neighbor, if you're the stranger, I welcome you. And I don't care what religion you are. I don't care where you come from. I don't care who you worship. I don't care who you love. What I care about is, are you a decent person? Will you help me out? My car goes off the road on a winter night. Will you stop, and do you have a chain in your trunk? Bottom line is, I think something is coming this year. I think it's coming from places like this, and I think it's going to transform not just Wisconsin, but America. Brothers and sisters, when we transform America, then we can all go to the bar and have a drink. Thank you very much. Solidarity.
Well, here we are right about the first day of spring, and an unusual situation in that usually we would have snow and ice, and we don't. And of course, you'll want to be on the lookout for the Easter Bunny. We hope you'll come back next week and every week to watch our town.